So, yep, like I said, welcome for April's community meetup. We have a great agenda today. We have Meltano here to present. We have Alex, who's going to be doing data assistance. And then we'll have a little something for cloud, for Great Expectations Cloud afterwards. So I'll jump right into, oh yeah, we're hiring. The slide's going to probably stay up forever. We're just constantly hiring. Keep an eye on the jobs board for some really cool positions. Some quick community stats. So since the last event, we've grown about 400 members. Our PyPy downloads continue to go up. Compared to last month, it was over 180,000. Hit an all-time high of 200,000 a day, which is amazing. And then let's see what else we have here. Some thanks and kudos to contributors. So thanks to Douglas Cook, Joseph McLean. Getting a little bit of feedback noise from someone. They could check their background. Yeah, so thanks. Michael Thomas, Jay Stammers, and then Taylor Turner, who's actually going to be presenting next month about this contribution for the data profiler package, which is up on the expectation gallery, worth checking out. Some changes to our top Slack supporters. Some new people have come in and answered a ton of questions in Slack. So thanks to David Maxon and Veronica Moy and Daniel Burendia Gonzalez and Dave Ruger. I don't know how to say. This is always where I get caught. is on this part of the presentation. But thanks again to everyone who's in there helping out in Slack. It really means a lot. And then quickly for me, I just want to talk about the hackathon real quick. The hackathon is done. It went really well. We added 178 expectations. There were over 300 signups, though it really was a small core of people that went crazy on adding these expectations. Some of the awards that came out most of the awards were on volume for each specific package. But for the specific awards, Andy Jessen's expectation for ICD category, Mohammed's for expect values let long to be on land or sea or land or ocean, and then Limwan for their stock market expectations, which includes some cryptocurrencies as well. So yeah, go check those out. I think some of them are in the gallery. If they're not in there now, they'll be by the end of the week. But yeah, thanks to everyone for the hackathon, whoever participated, and look for the next one. So I'll pass off to Don.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I'll present an update to the product roadmap. Like last month, anchoring our roadmap in our aspirations for great expectations, and that is powerful and expressive. After years of development and widespread adoption by data practitioners, the core APIs are robust, stable, and thoroughly tested, and it's easy to get started. So how does that map to what we're doing? In Q1, we made investments in documentation, and we added clear guidance on developing new expectations, which was showcased in the hackathon that Kyle just mentioned. And with the V15 release, we introduced standards for identifying deprecated code, which helps Great Expectations as a platform just be more transparent and predictable in terms of how it's evolving. And we dropped support for Python 3.6. So we did this by looking at usage data that showed that a very, very small number of users were still using the latest version of GE with 3.6. And so we felt both safe and confident that we could drop support for 3.6 with very minimal impact. So we did that. Then into the next slide. In this quarter, we're looking at it being easier to get started through data assistance, through new data connectors, and opinionated guidance on how to use certain platforms. We published the GCP stuff back in February. First reaction from the community on this call then was like, when's AWS coming? So it's on the map. It's part of the plan for what Kyle's team is going to be delivering in Q2. In terms of making it powerful and expressive, we're looking at batch metrics to be able to do multi-batch expectations and new use cases. We also have conditional and cross-table expectations planned for the next quarter. And then, we're building out test suites for integration partners. We're publishing coding standards. Those have been up for review internally now for a couple of months. So it's time to get them out in the public, particularly being a product with a large set of community contributors. I think being very transparent about how we're thinking about the code base and the standards that we apply and how we evolve it is important. We've been doing a ton of work on type hints to make it easier to develop and use great expectations. And we included very recently mechanisms in our build process to ensure that we don't slip back on any of this stuff. So we're verifying that, hey, the number of methods that don't have type hints today, that number is fixed and is only going to go down over time. So new contributions without type hints will kind of trigger a build failure with feedback on how it can be fixed. And then over time, we'll take the number of methods, like with every check-in, we'll try to reduce the number of methods in which we're missing type hints. We're doing better dependency management and rely on usage stats to reason about what version of dependencies that are declared as required for GE people are using in their environments. So we can look at how we version up those dependencies. And we're making some big changes, and like we're going to be redoing our API docs. This is an effort that Rachel is driving, and we're adding checks again to the code base to ensure that like doc strings are present on methods, and ratcheting that up as well, so that with every new check-in, if a method is added without a doc string, it would trigger a build notification for failure there. And we're doing that internally, and it's the same build process that's used externally. So anyone contributing will kind of be held to this new standard, so that with every contribution, we're leaving the campground cleaner than we found it, and continuing to make all of GE better. The V15 release shipped April 7th, retired Python 3.6 support. It had clear deprecation warnings. I'm super proud of this work in that, like, the warnings include when the code was deprecated, what the new method is of doing the same thing, and how to migrate there. And a lot of times it's a very easy, like a one-line change to use the new method, because it's there's an equivalent. And then we also include when the deprecated code will be removed, with the idea of retaining support for any deprecated code for what we would consider two minor versions. And so in the V16 release, that'll be the first time where we can remove some of the code that was deprecated as part of V13. We continue to expand the capabilities of profilers and data assistants. So that was introduced in V15, and then through the course of this release, it'll continue to get better. And apart from upgrading Python version, there were no breaking changes with this release. And moving forward, having no breaking changes is a guiding principle for us to help ensure that GE for you is stable and reliable. Last slide on this section. So for V16, this is shipping in summer of 2022. This is significant because those deprecation warnings say like code will be removed as of V16. So understanding when that's coming is significant there. And in addition to what will be at that point, new work on the profiler and the data assistants, the V16 will be marked by introducing metric storage and new data connectors. I think for the data connectors, connecting to data is a core part of GE, and we will be maintaining the current versions of data connectors for the foreseeable future. So these new versions will be kind of a new way of being able to connect to data, but it'll make it way easier to address batches, which will make it much more, you'll be able to reason about past metrics in ways that are challenging today. And so that's why the data connectors and the metric storage are bound together. It has to do with the new data connectors making it easier to address past batches. So both of these changes are additive and non-breaking. And then with V16, that will provide us the opportunity to start removing and retiring support for code that was deprecated in V13 or earlier. And again, those are called out clearly in those deprecation warnings. So you'll see it if you're using methods that won't be supported come V16. And that's it. Any questions or feedback on the roadmap, how we're reasoning about code, retiring code, those kinds of things? All right, if anything occurs to you, I'll be monitoring the chat for the rest of the call. Thanks, Kyle.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Don. Feel free to add questions to the chat, even during presentations, and we'll make sure we get to them. All right. I have the pleasure of introducing Alex for data assistance, which is a feature we're all really excited about. So go ahead, Alex. I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Kyle. My name is Alex Sherstinsky, and I'm an engineer at Superconductive working on the Great Expectations open source platform. And today, it is my pleasure to give you a brief glimpse of the functionality we have been working on called the Data Assistant. And I will be doing a demo with this notebook. Just a little introduction before the demo, and that is the use case is when a data engineer is tasked with quantifying the data set, covering it, bracketing it with a set of meaningful expectations, and does not know where to begin. One looks at the data, perhaps a very wide data table, multiple tables with columns that one might not understand what the values should be because the domain may not be familiar to the engineer. And any domain experts who could come be of help may not be available for days. So what can one do? The data assistants are the component that is an application on top of the profiling framework that we have been developing. So profiling framework looks at data, divides data into different subsets, and comes up with a meaningful set of metrics and expectations generated automatically. The data assistant takes that foundation and shapes it into channels of topics, semantically meaningful collections that one can reason about, sort of like instead of boiling the ocean, how can we chunk it up into manageable pieces and reason about them individually where context may be all the same. For example, one can think of the data as growing in volume. So how do we reason about that? Well, one can look at the table number of rows and chart how that number is growing over a set of batches. Or one can look at the unique values in the different columns and see if the number of unique values is growing. So that would be a way to think about volume. And in today's demo, I'll show the example of the number of rows in a table changing from batch to batch. Other data assistants may be focused on nullity. For example, in certain domains, date of birth that's entered into a column may not need to be 100% filled. It could be smaller, but what is the correct number? So nullity or uniqueness would be other assistants that we'll be working on. And we'll be able to also combine these assistants into a higher entity, sort of a dictionary assistant that combines maybe volume, nullity, uniqueness, and even parsing date times, make sure that those are to validation requirements. So for the present demo, we have the set of batches, each on average 5,000 rows, plus minus a couple of thousand rows from the taxi data set, New York Yellow Cab taxi data set, sampled 1 month per batch over 3 years. So we have 36 batches of data. And so the code up the top of the notebook is the boilerplate that I'm just going to go ahead and execute right now to prepare for the data assistant part of the demo. So here are our 36 batches with varying number of rows. We import our data assistant classes, data assistant, which is the abstract class, and the volume data assistant, and the result object that will be generated, filled to contain the data. Let's name our data assistant and instantiate it. The data assistant takes name, the batch request to obtain the batches of data utilized in the underlying profiler, and the data context. Let's look. Indeed, it has the correct type. Now let's run it. Running the data assistant returns the result object, which will contain metrics and expectations, as well as the time it took to run the profiler, which can be used for troubleshooting purposes. And now let's run it. The run finished quickly, and we have the result object. Let's go ahead and display the result object. That's what it contains. Profiler configuration, the net profiler, the metric, set of metrics, and also the expectation suite. Now let's plot it in a way that shows information instead of telling us what we should do with that information. That would come in a subsequent cell. As you can see, the plot shows from batch to batch the number of rows in this set of data samples is fluctuating. We cannot claim that the volume of data is increasing. So the interpretation would be that the number of taxi rides is kind of a nominal from month to month in this particular 3-year interval. Now let's plot and see the actual brackets of what the expectation quark should take. That's our upper and lower limits. When we do that, the plot shows us where the outliers will be marked. And these little areas outside of the bracketed intervals are exactly the areas as prescribed by the false positive rate that you can set in order to run the estimations of the parameters that will go compute the metrics for this assistant. We are working on APIs to give you control and access to be able to manage what your particular data assistant will output, so that you can then take the resulting expectation suite and use it as your development, test, and production validation set. Thank you. Would be delighted to take any questions.
I think you just blew everyone's mind, Alex. They're speechless.
We're all hoping that this, when it ships, will become really useful to you, and we would be really thrilled to work with you at honing the usability and practicality of this component. We're also very excited about.
Do we have a date when a version of this can get into people's hands, or a time range?
This is being developed incrementally and shipped. It goes out every week. I think in terms of, but we're still cranking on it. Like I would consider this sort of alpha beta, particularly from an API standpoint right now. The target is in 4 weeks, definitely within Q2.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, we'll make sure to get it in the community's hands as soon as possible, and maybe even reach out for some early feedback on some of these items.
Well, thank you very much, and let us kick it back to Kyle now.
I think actually someone might have a question. Mahmoud, do you have a question?
Yes. Hello. I'm Mahmoud. I'm a data engineer based in Miami. I work for eMed Healthcare, and I've been using Great Expectations. I've actually been implementing infrastructure with Great Expectation to run some QA on our data sources and our data lake. So I have a question regarding the data assistant. So does it provide you a set of expectations out of the box regarding the data?
It does. It provides you the expectation suite. You can name it, or if you already have a suite, you can pass that reference. Or if you don't have one, it will create it for you, a temporary name. You can get the entire suite and examine the expectations as well as the metadata. You can extract the expectations from it and add them to your own suite. Or you can use it wholesale, or in the upcoming work, we will enable APIs for you to control the parameters that affect the metrics that then contribute to actual values of the parameters in the expectations comprising that suite.
So it provides expectations based on its understanding of the data, right?
That's right. We take assistant on a subject matter, let's say volume, specific topic, slice of all of the things we could be thinking about our data set, and it will create expectations for that theme. Then you can pick another theme. So today we talked about volume, but you can also talk about nullity or uniqueness. So you pick those themes, you'll get expectations for that. And we'll also provide a way to combine them into one suite so that when you're happy with all themes and you just want one suite to use in the testing and production, you'll be able to take advantage of that as well.
It sounds great. That was great work right there. I just have a simple idea or a contribution that maybe benefit this. So since it's called the data assistant, do you think it could be more interactive and like at some point have like an interactive take user input into account maybe and try to scan through all the columns and maybe tables from the certain data sources and maybe provide you a sort of survey that asks you which types of columns you care about, which types of data types you care about, and then lists that down and then begin generating that suite.
That is actually already in place in at least some form. I'm sure it can be made better, but the idea of instead of boiling the ocean, dividing our data set into manageable concepts, we have this notion of a domain, which is exactly what it means, domain of influence. So you could say my domain is the whole table, my domain is a column, my domain is 2 columns or a set of columns. When you specify these domains, this is exactly where you get to name not only columns, but even columns by meaning. For example, numeric column, date column, commercial, accounting column, money, for example. So the basics of that are in place, and we would be just thrilled if users begin experimenting and trying it out and give us feedback as to what could be made better or what they like or not, so that we can together evolve this platform to a usable system.
Yes, that would be great. Great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great question.
Yeah, thanks, Mahmoud. All right, we are on to the last segment where Meltano will be presenting. So I believe we have Ken Payne here, who will be presenting for Meltano. Yeah, I'll hand it on over.
Awesome, thanks. Let me get my screen share.
Love the well-designed Zoom background too, that still fits you in screen, doesn't obscure any letters.
Yeah, we've got a fantastic director of marketing who is an expert at building us Zoom backgrounds. So yeah,
that's one for the resume. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Well, first off, thank you very much for letting us have a slot. I'm super excited about what's going on at Great Expectations and talking about how Great Expectations and Meltano work together. Yeah, it's just nice to be here and talking to you all. By way of introduction, my name is Ken. I'm a software engineer here at Meltano. I've been working since August last year on Meltano. Before that, I was a data engineer working in the startup space with a couple of startups based here in the UK. I'm going to be talking a bit today about Meltano and particularly about how Meltano can help you with your Great Expectations deployment. I was super excited by Alex's presentation and the improvements in the profiler. I'm definitely a big fan of the auto-generated expectation suite as a starting point. And it's also super cool to see that Alex is also talking in terms of environments, and we'll see a little bit later on how Meltano is also thinking about environments and how the environments feature in Meltano can be used to help you run tests across multiple remote environments. Before we get into that, I'll talk a little bit about what Meltano actually is. By way of wave, if your camera is on, or reaction emoji, who on the call has come across Meltano before? Let's see how well this works. Oh, cool! I can see a few hands and a few emojis. That's awesome. Well, I'm glad that a few people have heard of us. It seems like the majority, this might be their first look at Meltano, which is also super cool. Oh no. Cool. So what is Meltano then? Well, our vision for Meltano is for it to become the foundation of everybody's ideal data stack. We really see Meltano as bringing DevOps best practices into the data space. Meltano is designed to work across your entire end-to-end data platform. It's entirely open source, and we build on top of other open source projects. So hopefully there are a few, I mean, you'll notice Great Expectations is here under validation, but there are a few other open source logos that hopefully people on the call recognize. DBT and Airflow being quite important ones for where we are at the moment and for people using Meltano at this stage. We want to make it as easy as possible to build and deploy a data stack using modern best practices of version control, including your configuration, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and thorough testing at each stage. So really bringing software best practices into the data space via a tool that allows you to manage your end-to-end data platform in a single place. Before I move on to the demo itself, I will put up the obligatory "we're hiring" slide and ask if anyone has any questions at this stage. I know finding the hand button can be difficult, so I'll give it a second. Hopefully you're all just curious about what Meltano is now and eager to get started with the demo. Cool. In that case, let's get started. So I already have Meltano installed. We actually hit quite an amazing version milestone recently. version 1.100, which is super cool. If I then go and create a Meltano project, I'm going to call it GE Live. So what I've just done, and hopefully everyone can see this, okay? I can make it a bit larger if needed. What we've gone and done is created a Meltano project. The project really is the home of your data stack. I mentioned, and we saw in the previous slide, the various stages of the data lifecycle and the tools that are associated with those stages. In doing Meltano init, you can see we have folders created that roughly correspond to those stages. So that is kind of an indication of the direction that we might be going in with the project. If I then check out the project, what have I actually got in my Meltano project right now? Well, the key part of the project is your Meltano.yaml. And right now it looks fairly scant. We have a document version, which for now is just one all of the time. We have a default environment specified, and I'll talk quite a bit more about environments as we go through. And then a set of environments. And that's it right now. Our project is, for all intents and purposes, empty. Well, as this is a Great Expectations community meeting, I think the first thing we should do is add Great Expectations. And I can autocomplete. So what does it actually mean to add something to a Great Expectations project? Well, this will do a couple of things for us. Given that Great Expectations is a pip installable, Meltano itself is built in Python, so we're very, very friendly with Python and pip tools in general. This is creating under the hood for us a virtual env specifically for Great Expectations, installing Great Expectations into that virtual env, and it's also installing a file bundle. File bundles are a special kind of plugin in the Meltano ecosystem that allow you to essentially bundle up a set of files and directories that you would like to install at the same time as a particular plugin. So in this case, the file bundle is a pretty easy one. It's just setting up the base directory for us and giving us a README file. And we'll go and check out that README file in a second. Given that this is doing a full Great Expectations install under the hood, it will take a couple of minutes. But once it's done, we'll go in and have a look at a little bit of the Meltano folder structure, but more onto the README and figuring out how we use Great Expectations inside Meltano. Hopefully this will only take a second. I'm quite happy to take questions at any point in the demo. It is a kind of live technical demo, so things will go wrong and we have an opportunity to ask questions on the way through. I don't have a script, so you're welcome to interrupt me at any time. Cool, so as I mentioned, we've installed the file bundle called Great Expectations, and we've also installed a utility. Let's check out our Meltano file again and see what has actually changed. Well, so far, not a lot. We have an additional top-level key called plugins and a new utility added called Great Expectations. This will become important, particularly for those who are familiar with Great Expectations and know that just installing Great Expectations isn't always enough. You often want to have SQL Alchemy or one of the named installables for Redshift or Snowflake or Spark or any of the other adapters. So this kind of gives us an opportunity to change that. But why don't we change into the utilities directory and have a look at Great Expectations and the README. Cool, so this is the README that arrived with the file bundle, and it gives you some suggestions and some instructions for working with Meltano and Great Expectations. So we have a description of Great Expectations and links to the Great Expectations docs. We also have some getting started information for adding Great Expectations to your Meltano project and what to do to actually create your first Great Expectations project. So let's do that. plugins are invoked in Meltano in a couple of ways. So using Meltano invoke to invoke it directly, or as part of a pipeline using Meltano run. So for now, because I just want to run Great Expectations, I only have Great Expectations in my environment. I am going to invoke Great Expectations, and I will initialize a project. Straight away, having invoked Great Expectations, we actually get some Meltano log lines that are quite interesting. So you might have noticed in our Meltano.yaml that we have a default environment set as dev. The first log line is just telling us that we're in the dev environment. Right now, we have no configuration inside Meltano. It's an empty Meltano project, so this doesn't mean a lot. But you'll see in a second that actually being environment aware natively gives us an opportunity to when we configure Great Expectations, or more particularly when we configure our data sources and our suites, we have the ability to parameterize the inputs to those assets inside our environments. Cool, so I'm just going to go ahead and initialize a Great Expectations project. Similar to our Meltano, top-level Meltano project, we have a directory structure, and our Great Expectations project is installed. It might be useful at this point to have a look at what configuration Great Expectations will actually accept. So if I do Meltano config Great Expectations list, Meltano will tell us what configuration it expects. Right now, all it expects is the GE home environment variable, and we actually set that dynamically to the project root and utilities folder. This can be overridden in your Meltano.yaml, but given that that's where the file bundle sets up the initial folder structure for us, it's a great default, and it allows us to invoke Great Expectations from anywhere inside our Meltano project. You might be asking at this point, that's all well and good, but what we've done is a little bit heavier than just running the pip installable ourselves. Why should we be adding Great Expectations as a utility inside Meltano? Well, I mentioned a couple of times that environments allow us to do cool things with configuration, and really a way to demonstrate some of what Meltano is doing under the hood for us is to run Meltano invoke again. This time, let's set the log level to debug. And we want to invoke Great Expectations, and we'll just print the help. So in addition to creating the virtual environment for us and executing Great Expectations from that virtual environment, allowing us to isolate our Great Expectations installs from the other plugins we have in our Meltano project, Meltano will also take control of the environment variables, or the environment that your Great Expectations plugin runs inside of. And so the cool thing we have in here is the opportunity to access some of the Meltano global variables. So various settings, top-level settings from Meltano, including the project root and a few others, but also to start thinking about injecting our own environment variables. To show this off in a little bit more detail, I actually have a project that I created earlier. So rather than going through and adding a data source, hopefully adding data sources and then adding suites is quite a familiar activity to most people in Great Expectations. I will walk you through a project that I created earlier. So this is exactly the same thing, except my Meltano.yaml is a little bit more filled out. So here I have a number of plugins. So I have my Great Expectations utility, as we saw earlier. I also have an extractor and a loader. These are Singer type plugins that allow us to extract data, in this case from tap carbon intensity, and to load it into a destination, in this example Postgres, but this could be any of the major warehouses, a Redshift, a Snowflake, a BigQuery, or something like S3 for file storage. There really are an almost unlimited number of loaders that can be supported. And we have a great SDK for building your own taps and targets if you can't find one of the 300 plus that are currently supported and visible on hub.meltano.com. So in this sort of fictitious Meltano project, we're consuming the carbon intensity data, loading it into a Postgres warehouse, and using Great Expectations, we might be interested in running some expectation suites against that data, making sure that as it arrives, after our EL process has done its job, that it is as we expect. To do that, I've set up two environments, a development environment, which is my default, that has one set of credentials. And I've also set up a production environment that's also Postgres, but has a different set of credentials. What I have done to facilitate this on the Great Expectations side is, and if I show you my Great Expectations folder, my Great Expectations.yaml, I've added a data source, and super conveniently, Great Expectations allows seeding configuration directly from environment variables. So this gives us a way to articulate our configuration inside our top-level Meltano project, to reuse that configuration across the taps and targets. So I had to give target Postgres the configuration details of the Postgres database. Those happen to be the same ones I've used for giving Great Expectations access. So I've been able to reuse those, define those credentials once and reuse them across multiple plugins. Using environment variables, I'm enabled to inject those directly into my data source config inside Great Expectations. And this is super cool. It allows us to, for example, well, first let's populate some data. Meltano run, let's do a full refresh. Tap carbon intensity. Target Postgres. So once again, I'm using my default environment because I haven't specified or overridden the environment. This is actually going through and pulling the open source carbon intensity data for the United Kingdom and loading it into my target Postgres. And that's it. That's all it takes in Meltano sense to grab data from an external API and have it loaded into a database. To show you that this actually worked, where have I loaded my, sorry for jumping around. Oh, I haven't got Table Plus open. Bear with me a second. Let's have a look at the actual tables that created. Awesome. So I'm in my development environment. And we can see in the schema tap carbon, we have a set of tables created. These were created automatically by tap Postgres from the, target Postgres from the tap carbon intensity stream names. So I didn't have to define these tables. They were built dynamically based on the stream names and the Singer spec. The table we're probably going to look at most often, as I've created a suite for it, is the region. So we can see that inside. Can you
zoom in just a tiny bit? Sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all. Table Plus doesn't allow it. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in Table Plus. I just wanted to show that there is a Postgres database under the hood, and I've been able to load some data into it. So jumping back to our Great Expectations project, in addition to the data source, I've created an expectation suite for tap carbon, which at the moment just has a set of expectations that were actually generated directly by the profiler. I haven't been in and looked at this data. I've generated a set of expectations from the profiler, and they were a really good start. That's one of the things that we really like about Great Expectations, is that building your expectation suite from the ground up can be as easy as running the profiler. As I get to know this data, I would likely spend time adding my own expectations, but to get started, to just have a baseline set of expectations is really, really great. I've also added a checkpoint. These were both added using the Great Expectations CLI. And again, as an example, I won't actually create a whole expectation suite, but if I do Meltano invoke, Great Expectations, suite new, you can see the process for adding a suite via Meltano is no different to adding a suite through the regular CLI. The only difference being that you are running in a virtual env rather than either the system Python, if that's where you installed Great Expectations, or a virtual env that you are having to manage yourself. So as I said, I'm not actually going to go through and create a new one, but if I went through here following the Great Expectation prompts, I would be shown the notebook and would be able to interact with my data directly from the data source that has the development credentials injected. So before we try and run something in production, let's see if our Great Expectations expectation suite actually works. And what we like to do in our own project, we actually use Great Expectations with Meltano internally. We like to check data at our boundaries with Great Expectations. So as I said, in this example, after we've done our EL, we would typically run a checkpoint to verify that the new data that arrived meets our broad expectations for that data. We use DBT for modeling that data after it arrives. And again, before we hand off between DBT and ABI tool, in our case, Superset, we run another set of expectations to make sure that our presentation data also meets our broad expectations for it. Inside the DBT ecosystem, we also have tests, but we really like to use Great Expectations to sort of bookend our pipelines. So let's do Meltano invoke, Great Expectations, and I've run this before. So this is running a checkpoint still in our development environment, so using the tables that we just fully refreshed. And the expectation suite that I generated with the profiler. And we can see here that this passes. Because checkpoints use POSIX exit flags, the sort of 0 and 1 exit code, if this was part of a pipeline, and we use Airflow for our own internal project, if these expectations weren't met, we'd get a really helpful fail. And that would prompt a data engineer to go in and find out exactly what was going on with the data. So as I said, we really like the Great Expectations can be run in this way. And we use it with our production pipelines to make sure that data is always meeting our expectations. The last thing I'd like to show you is the same thing, but in production. So if I change my environment to prod and invoke the same thing, this will fail. So I went in actually after loading the data and reordered the names of the columns, as one of the checks that I knew was included in the expectation suite is checking for the column order. So I just wanted to show that it does fail, and we can catch both the sort of failures and the successes inside Meltano. I think that is more or less the end of the demo. I can talk a little bit more about the handoff, I guess, and maybe look in more detail at the reusing of environment variables. So I mentioned that inside our Meltano.yaml, we have our 3 plugins. I also mentioned that we reuse the credentials for Postgres, both for the tap and for our great expectations. And that's done here in our environments. So as part of our environment's definition, we have the ability to override configuration just for that environment. And so in this case, I'm overriding the host, user, password, and database name for Postgres and setting it to dev values in the dev environment, and using host, username, password, and database, specifically with tap carbon, as that's the name of my data source in Great Expectations, as a prefix, to pass those environment variables, to pass those secrets from Meltano down into Great Expectations. I do the same, except with prod credentials in our prod environment, just to be able to distinguish between the two sets of credentials. Where these are actually stored right now is a .env file, and we find for our own production use that storing this .env in something like AWS Parameter Store is a good way to secure your secrets and have them accessible by production systems. We have an open issue for supporting a pluggable secrets backend. So rather than storing it in your .env file, or the other option in production currently is inside the system database, you would be able to store these secrets inside a pluggable backend, a backend of your choice. But that's broadly the flow of configuration from a mixture of secrets. Some things are specified hard-coded. So I left the port hard-coded inside my data source, not because it's required, but just to sort of demonstrate that whilst you can specify almost everything in Meltano, there is always a good case to leave quite a lot of your configuration in the source tool, where users are going to be familiar with it. If it's static, it doesn't need to be brought up to Meltano space, but then the power of using environments to be able to overload the parameters that matter for the environment that you're working in. If I spent a bit more time on this, I'd love to show you other cool things that you could do. We've had quite a lot of talk about injecting parameters environment variables. So if you do have complex expectation suites and you want to run with inputs of various types, specifying the inputs inside your environment. And I'm sure Alex would be able to come up with a few more examples of cool things that you might be able to do with this sort of general ability to inject environment variables based on the environment or the stage that you happen to be in. I think that's everything I had planned. So yeah, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, we'll give some space for questions. I love how many stories Meltano can unlock for these like combinations of tools. It's really cool. All right, we can always field questions in the Slack as well. If people come up with ones, really late after the Zoom is over. Okay. All right. Well, Ken, thanks so much. Thanks everyone from Meltano for coming. Also, thanks for the awesome sticker that I snagged from you all at Data Council. Got it right on my water bottle. So thanks for that. And just one more quick update for Cloud, and then we'll let you all go. Alina, if you want to go for it, I'll share my screen for you.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, so I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Alina, and I'm leading the go-to-market team at Superconductive, and we've been working with some really early design partners from the community for the past couple months. And we've been implementing feedback directly into product development. So if you're interested in getting involved, there's a couple ways. So the first is ask for a cloud workshop invite, where we can show you a behind the curtain look into our product roadmap. And then if you want to be a part of our very early private alpha program and go on a data quality journey with us, your feedback will have a direct impact on how we're prioritizing product features and overall design. So reach out to me on Slack or send me a note at alina@superconductive.com.
I also added in the chat the link to the form that you can sign up with as well for Cloud, but either way works. Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming to the event. Oop, got my chat in front of everybody. Yeah, and we'll catch you at the next one. Thanks again, Meltano people, and be on the lookout for that YouTube. We'll be posting that in the next couple days. All right. Have a good week, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks for hosting, Kyle.